Thank you so much, Emily. This is such an honor being here, and this is such an important topic in so many ways. We're all really concerned about the safety of all our Ohio schools, and basically looking at that is really, really important. So, just a short history of our involvement, why we even have this Safe Ohio Schools toolkit has to do with a member. League of Women Voters is very much a grounds up organization. Our members absolutely have a voice. And it happened to come out of my league. Someone noticed an article that there was a school in Madison that had armed personnel, and basically it was in the court system. And she said, who knows? Which schools are armed? When did we start arming school personnel? What's going on? And so there was a lot of discussion in our local league, and we put together a proposal for a study. And we got it in a little late in the planning process for convention. So it became a non-recommended item, but we felt so strongly about it. We went to the floor of our state convention with the proposal and argued for its acceptance. We finally got it accepted. It was quite a battle on the floor because doing a study takes a lot of resources, a lot of time, and we've had studies fall apart and had to put them back together because we're all volunteers. We did an in-depth study, and I mean, we looked at it from every angle possible. And we finally presented the final position, which was formally accepted at the May convention in 2021. It was, notice, it was finally accepted, but the leagues had been discussing it, and individual leagues were able to vote on acceptance of it. They could modify it at that time. So there was a lot going on. You will notice the General Assembly introduced HB 99, um, basically giving school districts permission to arm school personnel, but mostly dealing with the training of them in March 2021. So that's the real short history of it. We testified even before it was officially accepted in May against that bill. We put together, what was really nice is when Emily contacted me, I was able to go into our archives and go through the study again, our position, basically what we had prepared. After our position, we got together with all the groups dealing with this question, and we actually did some civic education around the issue. And this just gives you a broad idea of the network we put together in talking about Safe Ohio Schools, and these were the partners that began. So let's look at this a little bit more so you understand it. Okay, in February 2016, the Madison Local School District basically had a shooting. There were two shot, two injured. So in 2018, at a Board of Education meeting, they started talking about the necessity of arming someone in the schools. And basically, they voted to arm teachers in that April of 2018. A lot of this has a lot to do with where our schools are located, how compact our communities are. When you look at our rural districts in Ohio, they are very spread out, and time from the school to the safety centers can be very long. And the biggest worry is getting someone to the school if something happens. In July of 2018, the school district had a public forum, and basically, they secretly, because in all the school districts, and you have a current list of the 100 school districts that currently armed their school personnel, This is not public knowledge who's armed,
Yeah,
um,
but these
which
are.
which is very, very important in all of this. But they basically armed three staff. So the school district in May of 2020 had basically there was a suit filed by parents and others who did not want the schools armed, and over the training. At the time they were arming them, the training was the same 780 some hours that a safety resource officer had to go through, which is very expensive. And so they were trying to bring down the training on this. So the district appealed, actually took their suit all the way to the Ohio Supreme Court. Okay, so the fear was from the General Assembly that the Supreme Court would side with the Madison School District that said that anyone who was armed in the school had to have the same training as an SRO or Safety Resource Officer. Okay. So the General Assembly was going, oops, we had people lobbying saying, no, you can't do that. That's too expensive. That's going to say our districts can't arm our personnel. And so the General Assembly in March of 2021, actually in between, we actually had a decision from the Supreme Court on that in 2020. Uh, they introduced a bill, and the heart of the bill was bringing down the training to almost nothing. Okay. And so, notice in June of 2021, while this bill was going through the General Assembly, Madison won their case that they should have the same training as any SRO. In July of 2022, HB 99 is signed into law. And school districts who couldn't arm school personnel because they couldn't afford the training jumped on the bandwagon. So that's what we're looking at. In that time, we did our study, we accepted our position. The League of Women Voters Study Committee came out with feeling that in no way should we be arming school personnel. It basically muddies the role of teachers, it muddies the role of staff, it is dangerous. We looked at all of those issues. So our position is very strong on this. And this is the position we used along with the statistics and the research we found while we did the study to testify against HB 99. Obviously, they didn't listen to us, but basically, we started with the strongest of our statements that we oppose the arming of school personnel. But we've learned from positions, if that's all you talk about is the absolute statement, you lose your voice when you are not listened to on your perspective. So we wanted a voice on the other issues, on the building of school buildings, of looking at safety issues, of the effects on targeted students, basically the storage of weapons, all of those pieces. So we first started with, you'll notice, alternatives to arming school personnel, which we're going to do a lot of talking about, is to create a healthier and safer school environment. This is looking at safety measures, looking at building designs, mental health resources, educating student and school personnel about violence prevention in schools. Um, we basically supported more research into the effects that arming school personnel would have and consideration on targeted students. we have students, we're not all the same. Our experiences, our life, our communities are not the same. Students who come from minorities, especially Black and brown minorities, have more trauma. They come from sometimes poorer, more violent neighborhoods. They react
Yeah.
differently to police, to guns, than do people who have a different outlook, have a different raising. And those became really, really important. So we added to our position, and this is important to know as we go through this and why we testify in certain ways. We said, okay, we're going to face reality. This might happen. But we need to put forth some important principles. So we looked at determining parameters, that is, consistent standards, transparency of decision making, using data and consultant opinions to develop policies and procedures. We really asked people to go out and ask their school boards, you know, and we'll talk about these later, about resolutions, about in light of whether or not they pass resolutions, what were the district policies, that people wanted it very clear. They wanted to know what was going on. Transparency. They should basically be transparent about the decision-making process. They should keep the community informed. They should listen to the community, to look at the stakeholders. And the stakeholders are all of those people who give our children and our communities healthy environments. So it's teachers, administrators, mental
Oh,
health specialists, healthcare professionals, school resource officers, law enforcement personnel, students at appropriate ages, parents, community members. We raise children together, and it's up to us to provide safety, safe environments, and reduce tension. And the looking at the parameters of our special situations. Funding, we tagged funding and liability because all of these things take funding and they all carry liability. We found after HB 99 was passed, the biggest concern was insurance for school districts. They now had armed personnel. They had to look at the consequences of that. They had to look at liability issues in a new way. So that became important. Some of the things, and we'll go through it because I do have a list of recommendations and things, they're expensive. Some of our big school districts have the best they can put forward because they have the funding to do it, or which is why I congratulate the city of Cincinnati and the school district of Cincinnati for looking at making the community partners in the schools, of looking at ways for principals to reach out to their communities to help support the needs in their schools. Storage. We found storage was a huge issue. I don't know if how many of you are educators. I've been in classrooms. Most of my teaching was at the college level, but I started at the elementary and high school level. And I don't care what kind of classroom I was in, those students defeated all the security in the classroom. They knew how to get through locks. They knew how to get in closets they weren't supposed to be. Um, we looked at storage issues, even in terms of biometric cases, etc. We all know students are enthralled with guns. Can't you just see? And at the time, there were all those wonderful articles about the mishaps in schools. the gun that was dropped, the student that got a hold of the teacher's gun, etc. So we put up all sorts of flags on storage issues. And if you say, well, they'll store them in the office, well, you've just added the reaction time. How is the teacher supposed to protect that class and get to that office to get that weapon? So these were all concerns about this. And even in terms of the personnel who was selected. How much do we really know about the background of some of our teachers? And schools, I know schools that armed personnel, and basically they did a survey to find how many teachers already at that time had permit. The minute we moved to permitless carry, we added issues. So, and then real training. Um, Basically, and especially the special training of how to use a gun around our young people. So these were all issues we highlighted. Along with all of that is this growing body of research of what really helps in terms of making our schools safe. And um, basically, what we're finding is it's mental health, mental health, mental health. Um, Basically we look at, and there's a couple of cases that are highlighted in Ohio right now. We just had the conviction of the father who knew his son had issues and gave him an automatic gun for Christmas. He used that automatic gun. The father has been prosecuted on that and found guilty. We know we know that violence prevention programs are gaining traction. They are effective. We know there's research funding for this. We know there's a risk assessment matrix tool that can be used for schools to assess how the level of threat and the vulnerability and identify even the upgrades to their environment. So every town, the American Federation of Teachers, the National Education Association, these all have reports. They focus on approaches that have been most effective, number one, in addressing student health. Number two, empowering teachers and law enforcement to intervene when students show signs that could be in danger to themselves or others, to improve school physical security and keeping guns out of the hands of people that shouldn't have them. That's really important. This keeping guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them. Um, you know, we keep losing to lobbyists there in terms of, I by training, as you heard, I'm also a pastoral minister. And when I worked in the parish, I dealt with a lot of people and a lot of issues and also a lot of information back and forth, both with school counselors and with our safety forces. With school counselors, if I identified someone who was having problems, I called the school counselor because they had the ability to do what I couldn't do in getting help for that student, to finding out if what I was seeing was true. And we got help for a lot of students. With law enforcement, we had some known cases of domestic abuse in town. We also knew where the gun owners were. So if there was any sign of problems in that household, while the police could not intervene unless called to do so, they could be closer to the site where this was happening. to reduce time. We've learned a lot, and that has a lot to do with the fact that we couldn't take a known abuser and remove the gun. So we had to find other ways. But that's an important piece. Okay, what were the key aspects on arming school personnel? Basically, what everyone hated was the reduce in the training requirements. It was minimal, absolutely minimal. DeWine only ordered the maximum 24 hours of initial training. Think about that. Voluntary participation.
In the training?
Yeah.
For, oh, volunteer participation in carrying the gun, not in the training.
Voluntary participation. No one's forced to carry a gun, but basically, if you carry a gun, everything is basically on this. We have the training oversight is the Ohio Mobile Training Team, and as I said to Emily, to send you these slides, these are hyperlinks, so you can learn a lot more about that. I want to really spend time today. I'm watching time because I want to get to what we can do. So basically, since the implementation of this bill, 100 Ohio school districts have authorized the arming of staff. So the law was designed to empower local districts to improve response times. That was the main thing. Okay, so this is the main part we need to talk about. How do we build Ohio safe schools? Okay. Number one, we learn the facts about gun violence and school safety. And I've given you sort of a fast outline of that. Um, we develop a school safety policy. That is really important to check if your districts and your private schools have a school safety policy. No school is exempt from this. Um, in fact, as Emily said, I'm a Brown University grad, and I was commiserating over what happened not too long ago on the Brown campus with the shooting of basically a former grad student going in to an open building and shooting, and then going on to shoot a professor in Boston. And we were commiserating. We had an incredibly safe campus, and the campus was known as incredibly safe because of the close-knit community, etc. But it happened. And it can happen anyway where we're learning. We have to draft and pass resolutions, and we have to basically support our school systems in everything they do for the whole child. So let's talk about that. Um, Everytown for gun safety. That's where these statistics come from. They are their most recent statistics in terms of gunfire in school grounds by intent. Okay. Gun homicide assault, 52.6%. They're targeting. Unintentional shooting, 14.9%. Others, we look at mass shootings, gun suicide death attempt, 6.7%. And again, this whole report is here in a hyperlink that you can see. But what are the facts about this? And we've seen this played out in the most recent shooters. 58% of shooters were associated with the school. They were either current or former students, staff, faculty, or school resource officers. 73 to 80% of school shooters obtain the guns from their home or the home of relatives and friends. Think about that. If the guns weren't in the homes, they wouldn't have access. 100% of all school attackers have exhibited warning signs. They don't really want to do this. They're putting out the signs and no one's picking up on it. 77% of school shooting incidents, at least one person knew about the attacker's plan. Think about that. All right, from 2013 through 2021, every town identified a total of 848 incidents of gunfire on school grounds. 573 occurred on the grounds of a preschool, elementary, middle, or high school, resulting in 188 deaths and 392 people wounded. We need meaningful action to keep our schools safe. All right, so what have we learned? Establishing safe and equitable schools that prioritize and support emotional and behavioral health. That is number one. That is number one. Um, and that is really, really important in terms of the partnerships between staff and students and utilizing a community school model, which is why I congratulate the public schools of Cincinnati for taking that seriously. Awareness campaigns. Also, in that regard, building the relationships between students and staff. Um, my grandkids who live in this state have gone through the Kent, Ohio public schools. And two of them are in college, but one's still there. He's a rising senior. Um, Basically, they have instituted a lot of programs that respect the relationship of students and staff. They allow, they ask seniors to send thank you notes to their favorite teacher or the teacher who made the biggest impression on them during their 4 years. The athletic teams have teacher support nights where students bring one of their athletic shirts for the teacher to wear to a game where their teacher is honored. Uh, Basically, they promote ways of interaction. So they're building this respect for one another so that there's an openness in the community. What's important, what we're talking about, is concentration on the whole child. Only in an environment that deals with the whole child can that child truly learn, feel safe, and be healthy and be challenged. So we look at their health, their safety, how engaged they are, how supported they feel, and how they are challenged. And so this is really important in terms of inviting community support. Um, Basically, this is a wonderful model too, this Be Smart, and it starts in the home. And this is really good to put out in your communities because notice what the first thing is: secure, really secure those guns in the homes and vehicles. To be very conscious of that, keeping them out of the hands of children. Model responsible behavior. Um, it's sort of interesting. My youngest grandson plays hockey, and we all know about hot tempers on the ice, and the boys are given signs to de-escalate, as they get frustrated on the ice and tend to fight. So I've seen a couple of fights on the ice. Um, and so basically, if adults aren't modeling dialogue, compromise, sitting down, talking about things, looking at ways to deal with frustration, our children are not going to learn those ways. So it's really, really important to model responsible behavior, to look at consequences. Ask about unsecured guns in other homes. Don't be afraid. Your children, if they're like my children and my grandchildren, spend a lot of time in other people's homes. Do you know if there are guns present in those homes? Do you know how they're secured if there are? Recognize the role of guns in suicide. Um, Basically, suicides are generally a call for help. Guns, when guns are in the home, guns are more likely used in suicides. They are more final than many other means. Um, when so we've got to have good relationships with our own children, and we have to be honest too about what's going on. I was ran into a school classmate of my daughter. They're in their 50s now, right? And I said to her, I said, I have to compliment your generation on your willingness to look at your own kids' mental health and get them the help they need. And she said, most of us have learned we have no choice in that if we want really healthy adults. And tell your peers to be smart. Okay, so what works? Developing and implementing an evidence-based treatment assessment program. Um, Basically, we need to empower school-based multidisciplinary teams to intervene when a student is at risk to themselves or others. And again, go back to what I said earlier, that as a youth minister working in the parish, I didn't have the credentials to use this sort of approach. If I saw a problem, I called the school counselor because that school counselor was licensed, basically knew how to properly reach out to people to find out what was going on and contact the parents to look at intervention. Knowing that is really important. Understanding who the support staff in any school is important, and what the procedures are, and supporting them in it. Implementing physical security upgrades to prevent access to schools and classrooms. This, in other words, you know this now, auxiliary doors are locked. There's one entrance into most schools. When I go into a school to talk to a class, I have a procedure that is mandatory in the school. I go through one door. I have to identify myself. I am buzzed in. I am go through a metal detector. I have to prove that I've been asked to be there and I'm escorted to the classroom. um, we've had to put those in. And so basically, having that one entrance allows us to put added security. I was at one high school and I had to wait until the students had gone in because I was a little early for my appointment there. And I had to stand with the security personnel who was watching every person enter. They were used to seeing those students. They recognized them. Okay. Um, Basically allowing law enforcement even to inform those plans. Hudson just built a brand new middle school. Our middle school had been shifted to old buildings over time, and finally it was really a disaster. And so we passed a bond issue to build a new high school. Well, a parent, I was in the school for an after-school event, and we were using the auditorium, which is central to the school. And a parent said, I want to take you through our school to show you. And there's the wings are 2 floors. Each wing is a pod. And on each pod is a bulletproof panic room. It's a
Mm.
classroom, but it doubles as a bulletproof panic room. And their drills now consist of being able to lock down each of those wings if someone enters the school unauthorized, and the students safely go to their room in that pod. And there are these bulletproof doors, like garage doors, that come down and close off the room. That was expensive. Not all schools can do that. They were a new school, new design. They put the latest in. They hope they never need it. This is interesting. And I was really glad that this was on Facebook to celebrate this. This is the SRO from Kent, and you will notice his dog. His dog is specially trained for work in schools. Yes, he's a sniffer. He can sniff out guns and he can sniff out drugs. But more important, he was a dog that was trained to be friendly around students. You will notice that Officer Poe and Matus is at a sporting event, walking around the track where the cheerleaders are. Basically, this is the second dog Kent has had. The first dog passed away, and then they had a period without a dog in the schools. And they're not the only school district up here that has done this. He's taken into classrooms, he walks the hallways, he visits different schools, he resides mostly at the high school. He's in the SRO office, so if the kids don't see him in the hallways and they want to go pet him and play with him, they go in the office. Why? It reduces tension. Think about all the emotional support animals. It totally calms the kids down. The fact that they go in the office to play with Matus means they get to know Officer Poe. If there's something they've seen, they might have a tendency to tell him. If a teacher would like the dog to visit the classroom because there might be some tension, he visits the classroom. It has reduced the tension in that school and given a chance for the kids to know Officer Poe and basically deal with issues. Okay, what else works? Extreme risk protection laws that empower family members and law enforcement to temporarily prevent access to firearms. Responsible firearm storage, raising the age to purchase semi-automatics to 21, requiring background checks on all sales. All right, so let's quickly, and then as soon as I'm through this, I'll take this down and we can have a discussion about this. I also gave you a list, and you'll notice Cincinnati has a resolution, but one of the first things is drafting and passing a Safe Ohio Schools resolution. So basically, in any district, in any school, with any school board, you don't go alone. You know who your allies are. You start by gathering the voices, forming the network. You state the facts and then the resolution. And the facts usually require just there, you have a sample model resolution there, but they're much more powerful if you do a little research and you add the statistics from your own district. That's really, really important. Basically, so some of your school districts already have these resolutions, and it is really important, therefore, you can still speak out in support of them. Make more people. These were done in the height of HB 99. Not everyone in your district. Think of all the new families in your districts that basically um, basically don't know this. Write a letter congratulating your district for having this. Write a letter combining it with the wonderful things they're doing in terms of the whole child to make the school environment safe. So, what do you do first? You assess your district. So you look at your allies. Notice who allies are. You probably have a Moms Demand Action chapter, Federation of Teachers, the Ohio Federation of Teachers, the Ohio Education Association, local unions. These are all people, PTAs, PTOs. These are all people who basically are want our schools to be safe. Statewide, OEA, OFT, the Ohio Coalition Against Gun Violence, Honesty for Ohio Education, all have statements against arming school personnel. And then build on the unknown. The more you build the education campaign through letters, etc., the more people you make aware of this, and you therefore gather your allies. Explain the danger and harm. Okay. Uh, Again, there are hyperlinks in this slideshow to the reports I used to gather the statistics. You can look at them. You can go to any of those other, especially Moms Demand Action in Everytown. They have lots of reports with lots of statistics. Um, Basically, look at students. Today's students in public schools have grown up with the drills. My daughter said it was really scary the day she got a text from her daughter that said, "We just had a drill, except it wasn't a drill, it was real." Someone had carried a gun into the school. He was intercepted, the gun was taken away, but the students were scared, absolutely scared. They're growing up with a trauma they shouldn't have to. Educators and personnel, what's the burden? What's the burden on them? It interferes with their relationships. It interferes with how they identify themselves as educators. And what is the community response? So explain the danger, explain the harm. And then the be it resolved, the reactions, basically the actions you can take. You have to be realistic. You invite in and build out. You solicit student and staff input as to what's reasonable. You want to have successes in terms of action, and then play a part in terms of setting those goals and actions. Here, this is a copy of the resolution that is in front of you, that you have a copy of. This is just a template. You make it your own. It can be shorter. It can basically hold information from your own districts. And again, even private schools should be aware of this. Hopefully, when you're paying that much tuition for private schools, you hope they have good support staff and are there and have protocols in place. Um, these are resources, and again, that's why you have permission to have this slideshow. These are all active hyperlinks in terms of this. And this is more, these are the organizations that are doing things on this, who testify, who look at things, who train people to go testify in front of their own school boards, to support them. And we shouldn't only be in front of school boards when we oppose something. We should
Mhm.
be congratulating our school boards when they do something right. It is really important. And again, these are things I have talked about, writing a letter to the editor or an op-ed to school board members and support them, gather other local leaders in your community, start a social media campaign. These are all really, really important things, and get word out. If you're doing an action, I'm sure the temple has a newsletter. If you do something as a group, take some pictures of it, put it in the newsletter, and talk about why you've done this. Um, and the alternatives to passing a resolution. Some districts don't or can't, because of their location or their fears or something, pass a resolution. But they can send they can be transparent. They can talk about their decisions. They can talk about that they would oppose arming school personnel. And you have a copy of the Safe Ohio Schools Pledge. You can start in multiple ways of making that available to people. The important thing too is make your voice heard. Vote. Primaries can be in most cases, are our most important elections. We should vote in every election. Local makes a huge difference as people move up in politics, but also local elections are these are people in your community. Know your local school board, know your city council, etc. Observe government in action. Many of our government meetings now are live streamed, which makes it easy to observe them in action. Research candidates in their roles, and there are multiple ways of doing that. And it's really important because I know some of them will not answer surveys anymore, but there are other ways to find out what they really think. Attend candidate forums, ask questions, follow legislation, be an advocate. With that, I'm going to stop sharing so we can talk for a little bit, um, and answer questions or just share. Maybe you've done something successfully.
We still muted?
No.
No, she unmuted it.
I have a question, and you might just think, thinking about the alternatives to passing the resolution, is there any concern, as is sometimes the case in justice work, that, because I saw that by default, the schools that don't approve arming their teachers, they by default, their teachers are unarmed. So I'm wondering, is there any, like, sometimes being too loud on an issue? Like, I'm thinking, like, some of us send our kids to private school. I have no doubt they would actually, I know they don't arm their teachers, I've asked. But so, like, if they sign the resolution, is that gonna pull people out of the woodwork who would want, you know what I mean? Like, if I'm being too
Right.
loud, am I gonna make an issue that's not currently an issue? So I'm just wondering, like, how you recommend kind of that balance, because I could see coming out firm when it's coming up, but if it hasn't been, like, am I gonna, I don't know what this, wake a sleeping
I know
giant?
I know exactly what you mean. And sometimes, especially in the case you're talking about, um, private schools and private school boards, the better
The
thing,
public too. I mean, maybe they're being
even public,
intentional.
the best
Yeah.
thing right now is come at it from the positive. Come at it
Okay.
from looking at the mental health issues, especially, and you have a case for that because you're looking at the parents who are currently being prosecuted because they armed a student that they knew had a mental health issue. So come at it by asking questions about what protocols do we have for notifying parents if it's noted that their child, their student might have a mental health issue. How is the school supporting the whole child? How are we looking at, given, we're in a really tough time right now, and students are feeling it. And you better believe students are lining up their opinions in terms of the violence being used in terms of settling political issues. And again, what is that modeling? So it is time not to put the focus on the guns and the arming, but on the mental health, the trauma our students are going through in these times. Do they have an outlet to talk about it? And, because believe me, they're on social media. They're seeing all this stuff. You better believe they have opinions and thoughts.
Thank you.
Dr. Leaf, you mentioned that in 77% of the cases, there were warning signs. Someone knew that that kid had been talking about going and shooting up their school or whatever. What would be the right thing for a parent or a peer to do in that situation?
Basically, it's up to a peer, and that's where the relationships with school support staff becomes important in teachers. It's if the school has anonymous ways for students to basically notify someone on staff of what they're seeing, they're more likely to let that person know. If the school has educated their students that it is the responsible thing to do that is in the best interest of their friend, to let people know. And that's where protocols and should be in set so that a teacher knows who and what and how to get help. How are parents notified? I will always go back to, I knew as a youth minister, I needed to call the school counselor. So I made sure I knew every single one of those school counselors, who they were, and I knew who I could call. It's really important because there are procedures that make sense and get the student help. They're also um, basically more than likely, if that student has been showing ba behaviors that raise flags, um, the counselor might even already be aware and would have some knowledge of the family and how accepting that family is because it changes the intervention at that point. But I have to say, we do not, for the most part, in most districts, in most areas I know, see it as a negative for children to be in therapy. We know it's important today. Um, I've got two grandchildren in therapy, you know, because of, their particular learning challenges, etc., and how important that is.
I'll just limit that. I'll say a lot of districts, my sister is a counselor in Pennsylvania, and so she deals, that a lot of school districts have like a hotline that
Yes.
students know about so that they can report it to the hotline. And so for some students who may not feel comfortable going to an adult, don't know who to go to, they can call and report it to the hotline.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's really important. And,
yeah. They have to know it exists, right? But yeah,
yeah,
It can be anonymous.
yeah.
We have maybe
Totally.
one more question, because we got a hard noon deadline, we gotta pick up kids.
So,
Well, it's less of a question, I just wanted to add on this topic, like a point of complexity and nuance that I think, and I in no way disagree with what's being said, but I just want to throw out that I have not at all surprised that 77% of cases had the red flags. There's also a whole lot of other kids who also, because of disabilities and being kids and whatever, but then I hate all of you, I'm gonna shoot up the school.
yeah,
And I have seen in my work in education law, at least in the greater Cincinnati area, a vast uptick in the last couple of years of kids getting expelled and suspended for making these are all the kids I hate and I wish that they would die kind of lists, which was abundantly common all the time in every elementary school. I don't know what the answer is, but I'm seeing also a huge, probably 1,000% increase because it was never done before, of kids, even like 10-year-olds being charged with things like terroristic threats.
yeah.
And so I think the city in it want to take the paper seriously and also be aware of like the nuances.
That kids can be kids.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I
right,
think
right.
a relationship between
Yeah.
like between teachers and kids it becomes so important because the teacher should be able to say, like, I know this kid, like,
And
you know. Yeah,
Right.
say, give them help, give them your support, and get them.
Yeah.
I totally agree with everything.
Yeah, I was
Right.
talking with Manish about that too, and he was talking about how he thinks there are many cases in which the legal system is used in a way that the legal system should.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. My grandson is at a school, that has a hard policy on what looks like fighting. And boys, they show affection by the slap, the body ramming, etc. thing. They have a hard line policy, and all the explaining these two kids did in terms of we were just playing still got them a suspension for 2 days.
Yep.
And so we're still learning. Well, I
Yeah.
thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me, and hopefully you'll start with the positives.